Hello, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Seyka, CEO and co founder of AdAstra, where we find you the people you need to change the world. Today, welcome to our show, AdAstra and we have the great privilege of having Ryan Carlisle on our show for great conversation spanning the transformation of the new space industry, perspectives on leadership, career growth, team building, and what the next big domain will be in space, especially since once Starship is operational.
Hey everybody, I'm Brian, COO, CTO of AdAstra. Really excited to introduce Ryan on the show today. You graduated from Yale back in 2011 and then worked at SpaceX for nearly 10 years. I actually interned for you or in the same group as you. That was a good summer. And then you rose the ranks from launch engineer, senior manager, launch engineering to director of engineering, and then left SpaceX at the end of 2020 to start your own stealth space startup. Exciting stuff.
Very, very exciting stuff. Every time Brian's mentioned you, just kind of in passing to me, he's like, Ryan's so cool. And he rose so quickly and did really impressive stuff at SpaceX. So very cool. And big exciting announcement here. Ryan is co-founder and CTO of Argo Space, which is emerging from stealth. So the industry is learning your name brand new now. So please, we'd love to hear a little bit more about Argo and share some details of your team.
Sure, yeah. I'm really excited to be here and to be talking about Argo. Argo Space Corp is a company that I co-founded with my two brothers, Robert and Kirby. Our goal really is to make in-space transportation both abundant and affordable. The way we're doing that is with reusable in-space vehicles powered by water that we plan on sourcing in space, specifically from the surface of the moon.
Nice.
So we're really excited about that whole architecture. And in general, we're really excited about the growth of the space economy and its move from just a LEO launch market to really being able to build economies and companies that provide services in the space itself. And transportation is really a fundamental piece of that. So that's why we're starting where we are.
Oh, so exciting.
And so charming that you're founding it with your brothers. How you all ended up studying in kind of similar arenas that made this possible? Tell us a little bit of that backstory.
Yeah, we're all three really big space people and have been our whole lives. We grew up in Houston, going to the Space Center, building Estes rockets and launching them in our local high school football fields. So it's really been a big part of who we are for decades at this point. We've wanted to start a company together, a commercial space company together, since before commercial space companies were a thing, really. So all three of us ended up at SpaceX and now have this opportunity to build a company together, and it's fantastic.
And it seems like you each kind of chose a different domain. Talk to us a little bit about your different roles and how that played out.
Sure, yeah. That was not necessarily a planned thing, but we all studied engineering in school.
Okay.
Robert and Kirby both got aerospace engineering degrees. I got mechanical. And so then it worked out. Robert went and got an MBA. He worked in aerospace and defense consulting. And then at SpaceX, he was in sales. So government sales, commercial sales, Starship sales, sort of touched every vertical there. So he is perfect CEO material. Kirby is on the operations side, so he's a COO of Argo. He was in operations at SpaceX as well. He led teams that did a lot of the early Falcon 9 refurbishment campaigns. So some of the very first vehicles to be reflown, Kirby was leading the teams of engineers and technicians to get those vehicles ready for flight again, and then working with government customers to convince them that, hey, flight-proven rockets are the way of the future.
Yeah.
I was more on the technical side, so that's CTO of Argo. Leading engineering teams at SpaceX, sort of across disciplines. We had mechanical and electrical and fluids, structural, civil, high voltage electrical. So had a lot of fun designing huge systems, complicated systems, and I'm really excited to be doing that again at a company of our own.
So exciting.
Very, very cool. And you were at SpaceX for around a decade. What can you share about the change you've seen in the new space industry over that time?
Sure. Yeah, it's been incredible. I remember I went to a space conference, maybe my first or second year at SpaceX, and SpaceX was very much still the up and comer back then, in 2011. And now it's the dominant industry player. And that has been, I think, really great for the industry as a whole. SpaceX has served as an incubator for a lot of talent, a lot of
Oh
ideas,
my gosh, yeah.
and obviously a lot of these new space startups that are sort of forming the foundation of new space 2.0 came straight out of SpaceX, whether it's the founders, whether it's the sort of access enabled by things like the rideshare programs. So I think SpaceX has been transformational for the industry as a whole, and it's still doing incredible things.
Yeah. Yeah, not to mention the talent machine that it has produced of so many new space startups. Yeah, coming out of SpaceX talent. Speaking of the talent at SpaceX, you rose the ranks in leadership. About how many people were you managing when you were at SpaceX?
Sure, I ended up with a team of about 130, as I said, split across many disciplines, and got to work on sort of every vertical at the company, whether it was Dragon, Starship, Falcon, Starlink, which was a lot of fun to have a big interdisciplinary team, but still be able to feel like you're doing small group projects, right? You could
So
get a
cool.
couple of engineers from each sort of talent group and be working at a bunch of different sites too. So we'd have projects at
Yeah.
Vandenberg, at Starbase, at Cape Canaveral, and Hawthorne. Um, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. The Certainly management was the thing I had to learn on the job, as many do in sort of high-paced engineering environments like SpaceX. But it's something I enjoyed, and it's something I'm really excited again to be building at Argo. Is a great team of talented engineers to make incredible projects together.
What was your favorite project at SpaceX?
Oh, that is a really hard question. Um,
Or what's one or two that just quick come to mind, maybe?
Sure. One thing I loved doing was the 39A launchpad build.
Mm,
It was fun because it was, high stress, tight schedule, as most things are. But it was also the great sense of history there.
yeah.
Being able to transform this pad that had hosted the Apollo launches, the shuttle launches, and now being able to build that system um, for SpaceX's human spaceflight ambitions was a lot of fun, sort of humbling, and more than anything, it was the team, right? The team at SpaceX at the Cape and my team designing it worked really well together, and we had just a lot of fun building that pad out.
Yeah.
So that's certainly ranks right up there. There are many, many to choose from, but yeah, that's near the top of the list.
Yeah, I had such a blast being able to go to 39A and get to explore the rotating service structure before it got taken down and
Yeah.
like go up to the top of the launch tower and everything. It's a beautiful place and so much history, and I appreciate that. I felt like SpaceX did a pretty good job of maintaining it the best they could, but also realizing, hey, we're stepping into another generation, and like it was becoming a bit too much to manage. Like the rotating service structure was like uh, beginning to decay a bit, right? And so it was time for it to go.
Yeah, certainly. There were, both safety concerns and just
Yeah.
operational concerns, but we did, feel a sense of privilege to keep some of the old
Yeah.
aspects as well. There's the phone up at the crew level is the same
Yeah.
phone that's been on that tower. We kept that, refurbished it. And there's other aspects as well that you just sort of get a sense of history walking around that
Yeah.
pad.
Yeah. So fun.
In having this experience leading and managing large teams and now shifting your focus to growing a small team into a larger team, what can you share about some of your strategy with hiring and team building for Argo?
Sure. Yeah, we're very much focused on team building right now. It's going to be a big focus of ours for the next year ahead, and obviously in the future, but in the near term specifically. We've got 5 currently, and plan to keep growing pretty quickly with our pre-seed round closed. But thinking about it, you have to be thinking about your team for tomorrow and for the future, right? So we're trying to hire technically brilliant people, but also people who could grow into leadership, right?
Yeah.
Because your first
Mhm.
handful of people at a startup are likely going to end up leading departments in the future.
Yep.
And if they're not, that's okay, but that's something you need to be aware of upfront. You can't
Yeah.
hire someone to lead a chunk of a team, say, well, they'll learn it on the job, and some of them will, but you need a mix of those people
Yes.
that can be great people leaders and great individual contributors, and be very cognizant up front of what you're hiring for.
Yeah. And finding people who are technically excellent, technically competent to have their hands on the technical work and are willing to be individual contributors until there's a point that leadership makes sense. And it's a really interesting piece of what we find we're often looking for with startups is finding those people who can be exceptional individual contributors and move into leadership. And when your talent bar is really high, that pool is it's not a huge one, right? So it's a really fun spot to be finding those incredible people.
Absolutely. And it's, you know, it is a constrained pool. I think it's really important, something that certainly I learned at SpaceX and is sort of a truism across the industry. It's really important to keep the bar extremely high.
Yeah.
Mm.
So even if you feel pretty desperate for a hire, you know, you are going to have that person helping you build the team for a long time. So it's much better to really be getting the A players in the door than sort of settling for a panic hire that you think will help you in the near term.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Do you feel that you've got a pretty strong base? Like you've kind of got your eye on the people that you want to hire, or is it a pretty kind of broad strategy just to look at who's out there for your initial hires? That
Sure,
question makes sense.
a little bit of both, I would say. There's certainly targets, you know, specific people that come highly recommended, or that I or someone else, one of our other co-founders or early hires has worked with, that would be amazing to get. There are certainly some tools also, whether it's recruiting firms or just some of the LinkedIn searches you can do to narrow that pool down.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not easy. I mean, finding great people is not easy, and there's a lot of constraints too on where you're located versus where they're located,
Yeah.
what exactly they want. You know, some people don't want to work in a startup environment because it's risky. So yeah, it is. There are certainly challenges, but there are fun ones to navigate generally.
Yeah. Yeah, we're recording this in April 2023, just kind of put a timestamp on it. And relocation has been a really interesting topic as of late. It's gotten substantially more difficult with the market and mortgage rates the way that they are, and individuals going, you know, we had in 2022, we had some salaries and housing prices skyrocketing and, you know, inflation impacting the numbers that people were wanting to see. So all of that has really influenced relocation. And it, you know, it's just an interesting factor to pull into hiring strategy. However, you may have easiest to recruit to location in terms of how desirable it is. You want to share a little bit about your location?
Sure. Yeah. We I feel super lucky. I'm glad you brought that up. We just found we just moved into a brand new facility, new to us anyways, in Hermosa Beach, just in the past few weeks, and it's been phenomenal. It's a great building, just right by the green belt in Hermosa, if you know where that is.
So nice.
There's a rooftop deck with ocean views, and it's really perfectly sized for a small startup. Right?
Yeah. Casual ocean
lunch
views.
with a view of the Pacific is not too bad.
Yep.
So I feel fantastic going to work every morning. And the South Bay in Los Angeles is also a really great talent hub for aerospace specifically.
Yep.
You know, whether it's SpaceX or whether it's several of these other new and now large companies, it's a great place to be, and it's a great place to be recruiting. But yeah, we're incredibly lucky to have found the location we did, and we're really excited about building it out and building a team there.
Yeah, so cool. It's one of the coolest, if not the coolest, locations I've ever gotten to take a look at. So
Yeah.
very, very, very neat. I'm excited for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. In terms of leadership, what can you tell us a little bit about your leadership philosophy, or what kind of makes people want to work for you?
Sure. No, I wouldn't presume to know all of the reasons, but I do like being a technical leader.
Yeah.
I like sort of having my hands in the work and you know, working with my team on projects. There's certainly different philosophies to that, but that is mine. And part of that just because I can't let it go.
Yeah.
You know, I'm an engineer first. That's why I'm the CTO of the company. And not the CEO, I think I'd probably be too in the weeds, left to my own devices. But I really like being close to the team on the projects. And I like, you know, I really like the sort of collegiate sense of camaraderie that was really strong for me at SpaceX. Just where everyone feels comfortable together, where it's relatively flat organizations, and where you do feel like you're part of a team accomplishing something together, rather than just, in an org chart turning a cog somewhere. I think those are really important philosophies to foster in a company, especially a new company where you want to be building an early team that's excited to work there and excited to work with the people every day.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really wonderful. And that passion and excitement, I think, is also a key piece of what makes, I'm sure, you a great leader. It's also a key piece of what makes our industry so unique, right? Is that when we're looking at individuals who are, frankly, could take a role in tech and double their salary, and like that's not an exaggeration, that's maybe even conservative, right? But there's very little interest for the people who are really driven by what we're doing in the space industry. And it's
Yeah.
that passion for excellence and creating inconceivable technology that really pulls people into our industry. So it makes a lot of sense that that's also what makes people really excited to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're excited to have a big vision, right?
Yeah.
When we founded Argo, we wanted to be in the space industry. It excites all of us profoundly, but we didn't want to just be making a widget for the space industry, right? We wanted to be building something that we felt was an important next step that could help sort of the entire economy grow, which is why when we sort of settled on this water-based architecture, we were really excited because it felt like a piece of infrastructure that could actually help the whole industry level up. So that vision we all share very tightly, and hope that vision excites other people as well to come on board.
Yeah.
So fun. Are you speaking to that a bit more? Will you also be kind of doing the harvesting or mining of the ice and water, or is it like, are you mostly focused on the utilization of water?
Yeah, we definitely plan to do both. So,
Okay.
So cool.
it turns out there's a lot of water on the moon.
Yeah.
This is, relatively recent findings keep increasing that number, right? Whether
Wow.
it's from NASA, it's from JAXA, the Indian Space Agency, the Chinese Space Agency recently with their rover. Huge results coming back for the prevalence of water ice, especially in the polar regions.
Wow.
So we are excited to be, taking advantage of the moon's shallower gravity well, harvesting that water, and then bringing it into space for use as propellant and creating that supply chain, right? To use the in-space resource to further in-space activity. Creates a great sort of positive feedback loop.
So fun.
So exciting. That is like such a fun step into the reality of making space more accessible, right? Is like not just taking Earth product and using it in space, but actually being able to use space materials for furthering our exploration.
Absolutely. That's something we talk about a lot, is this conversion from a sense of scarcity or preciousness of resource,
So
and
good.
specifically propellant and delta V, to one of abundance. And in order for that to happen, you cannot be bringing all of that out of the Earth's gravity well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in-space resource utilization is really critical for growing that next phase, and for a big expansion, sort of another step change in how easy it is to move and operate in space. So we're very excited about the possibilities of sourcing that from the lunar surface.
Yeah. Yeah, we're always talking about mass and delta V, and they're very related. And so as soon as you can get mass and get delta V from the moon, that does seem like it'll be quite a game changer.
Absolutely. And, getting it from the moon and then using it all the way back to Leo even, to open up those high energy orbits is what we're very excited about, right? So access to low Earth orbit is getting cheaper and getting more reliable, certainly, but there is still a gap that we've noticed. And one of the things that sort of got us excited about the near-term prospect for the transport service is that access beyond low Earth orbit to, say, geosynchronous orbit or to lunar orbits is still very hard. There's not as many opportunities. It is much more expensive, both energetically and in terms of cost. So being able to pick customers up in orbit, in low Earth orbit, and then transport them to those higher energy orbits is a service we think is incredibly valuable, and something that enabled by our reusable vehicles, by our in-orbit pickup ability, and by the high delta V that our vehicle can achieve using our water propulsion system.
So exciting. So does that basically allow these launch vehicles like the Starships coming online to, even though they're capable of getting to these higher orbits, just stick to low Earth orbit? Is that like a more efficient way of getting a vehicle to a higher orbit, is to still just launch to low Earth orbit or LEO and then have you come along and boost that orbit?
Yeah, that is certainly our proposition anyways.
Cool.
And fundamentally, if you look at it
Yeah.
from a physics perspective, the gravity well of Earth is incredibly deep.
Yeah.
So, and getting out of it takes really high thrust engines,
Mhm.
chemical propulsion.
Yep.
So being able to use an in-space propulsion system to get the rest of the way helps enormously,
Yeah.
both for the customer capability and for the launch vehicle capability, right?
Yeah,
If the
especially if the launch vehicle is trying to be reusable, it doesn't want to get that high and that fast.
Absolutely. And, for a small launcher, not having to take up a kick stage or a third stage with the payload is incredibly helpful for the vehicle. You
Yeah.
can just take up the payload, and then an in-space transport service such as Argo's can take it the rest of the way. That sort of helps everyone out. So I think that it is really going to open up whole new business paradigms in the entirety of cislunar space, to have this new layer on top of the existing transport systems in space.
Very cool. And there are definitely other in-space transportation companies out there. I think some also using water or planning to use water. What sets you apart from some of these other companies out there?
Sure. Yeah, we're actually really excited about that. I think the more people are on the water bandwagon, the better, right? We think it's a
Cool.
perfect propellant. Has a lot of enormously beneficial properties. It's dense. It's storable. It's a good radiation shield. Its liquid range is really wide. Anywhere that people are operating in space, you need it anyways.
It's
Mhm.
safe.
Right? It's incredibly safe. It's non-toxic. It's non-explosive. It's non-cryogenic. So I think it's great to see more and more companies coming out, building water propulsion systems, looking at water on the moon. So that's great. For the transport services, same thing. I think it is becoming obvious to more and more people in the industry that this is needed.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
an in-space transport service is really critical to the next phase of this expansion. The ways that we do like to differentiate ourselves, I think importantly, are that we are planning to be reusable from day one. Our vehicle, the
Mm.
Argonaut, is going to be a fully reusable in-space vehicle.
Argonaut, I like that.
Yeah, we do too. But so it lives in space, right? It's going to be there, flight proven, if you will, ready to pick your payload up, on orbit pickup. That's an important capability. Take it to its destination, come back down, repeat the process. And then again, the water propulsion enables a high total delta V, so it can hit these high energy niches. A lot of the in-space transport companies now are really focused on LEO to LEO movement, or maybe LEO
Okay.
to MEO. Some of the bigger kick stages can do a GTO or TLI, or
What are some
something
of those
like that.
other orbits?
Sorry, yeah, that's translunar injections. TLI,
Ooh, nice.
GTO would be a geosynchronous transfer orbit. So,
Cool.
sort of getting your ellipse out to
Yeah.
geosynchronous orbit, but not fully circularizing. And those are great. And there's a lot of economic activity to be had beyond low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
So, enabling those high energy transfer through a system like this really enables a lot of business opportunities that you can't get just from a LEO to LEO transport service.
Wow. I'm excited.
Yeah, this is so cool. So cool. So through your whole career, you've worked in intense environments, right? And you're heading into your own startup that's known for being a very intense environment. As a high performer that has not only thrived but grown and grown to take on more challenges, what are some ways that you keep your mind and body in a high energy state that you're able to take on those intense challenges?
Sure. Great question. It is a high energy environment, right? And they're doing different stuff every day. I'll be, working to recruit. I'll be building desks.
Yep.
I'll be, manufacturing pieces of our propulsion system. I'll be running tests in our vacuum chamber all in the same day, writing
Yeah.
a government proposal. So, the ability to task switch is really important, and an important way to enable that is really setting aside time to focus on a given task, right?
Yeah.
You sort of have to compartmentalize your time intelligently in order to get that done, so you're not getting constantly distracted, which is very easy in a startup environment,
Yeah.
right? There's always too much to do.
Yep.
So being able to focus and on one thing at a time is really important. And that's, all the normal stuff, right? Staying healthy is important. Getting outside is important. I think we have sort of this natural benefit of being in a beautiful location in Hermosa Beach,
Yeah.
where we can walk down to the ocean for lunch, right?
Right.
Most days, like just that little bit of outdoor time and sort of natural space, I think is important and sort of rejuvenating and helps you focus
Yeah.
on the tasks at hand.
I like how you were talking about how the key is that you have a lot of tasks, so you need to be good at task switching. And to be good at task switching, you need to not switch tasks, right? Like essentially,
Yeah.
you have to like really separate them and compartmentalize them. And I think that's a really cool distinction to make.
Yeah. So if you were to break down any of your favorite, let's call them life hacks to be a little trendy, for you talk about, getting outside, that natural light, right? We know we're learning through more and more research how beneficial that is to our body. What else? What else keeps you in this high performance state where you're able to have the focus, prioritize the tasks that need to be handled, and accomplish what you are?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I think, a routine helps. For me personally, I was never nearly as good working from home.
Yeah.
It made a lot of difference for me to have dedicated space to go and focus on work. You're doing work when you're at work, and you're home when you're home. So that made a big difference for me. And then, working to make that space sort of pleasant is also really important.
Yeah.
So we're building out our office now in a way that isn't just, we're throwing chairs in a room. We're being very intentional about trying to make it a productive place to be and to work. And, a lot of that is small stuff like getting good, soundproofing and
Yeah.
having a conference room and having, like just little things like that make it an actual sort of focused workplace are really important. I also drink a lot of coffee.
Yeah. Yep. That's fabulous. Do you seeing that was a really strong benefit for you to kind of have a space for work and a space for home? Do you think that your organization will be a fully on-site organization?
I think there's always exceptions to that, and it's very much person to person. I think that, especially for an engineering startup that is hardware focused, that's
Yep.
building things, it's critical that the people building the hardware and that are iterating on the hardware, running the tests, be on site. I mean, you can't turn a wrench remotely.
Yeah.
Um, that said, there are certainly people and job functions that are perfectly productive remote.
Yeah.
There are several people on my team at SpaceX that were more productive remote.
Yeah.
The lack of distractions for them way more than made up for the ability to stop by people's desks. So I think Argo, especially at this point, will be mostly in person
Yeah.
in our offices, but it's not a dogmatic thing. It's about the function and the person more than an absolute.
Yeah. Very, very cool. We're seeing right now another interesting kind of trend in hiring is candidates having a very strong push for remote, and companies have a very strong push for on-site. And it'll be very interesting to see how, I know with COVID in 2020, there was this big influx of remote work, and a lot of the big tech companies are now going back to in-office. And so just seeing how that pendulum will swing and pull people in any direction will be very interesting to see how that plays out.
Absolutely.
And with having closed your first round of funding, what are some of the bigger milestones you have on the horizon that we can look forward to?
Sure. Yeah. Our biggest focus is this in the coming year. As I said, growing the team is number one. Got to get great people in the door to, keep that process going. On the technical side, we're really working both tracks in parallel this year. We want to be working on the lunar surface efforts, the water extraction from regolith. We're working on sort of a demonstration scale unit of that right now. And then also keeping the spacecraft development going. So propulsion system development, working towards a demo mission in late 2024. Both of those technical tracks are running full speed. And we're really excited about the progress we're already making. And I think it's going to be a really big year for us.
So fun. Can you share a little bit more about what regolith is and where we find water and stuff like that, just for those who aren't as familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So regolith basically is just moon dirt.
Yep.
It's the surface of the moon. It's, analogous to Earth dirt, more or less. No organic matter, obviously. But really, we're looking in the polar region, so sort of near the
Sure.
north and south pole of the moon. There is a large, relatively speaking, concentration of water ice in the regolith.
Is it like mixed up, like almost like grains of sand, or are there like chunks of ice?
So that is a great question, and one that's pretty open. There are these things called PSRs, permanently shaded or shadowed regions,
Mm.
which
Okay.
are in craters near the poles. And you can imagine, the sunlight's coming in more or less horizontal. There's a crater, so the
Yeah.
bottom of the crater never sees sun ever.
Yeah.
So it's extraordinarily cold down there. And
Yep.
those areas have very high concentrations of ice, likely sort of big chunks, right?
Cool.
Sort of big deposits. We are more excited about sort of the non-PSR polar regions where the ice seems to be sort of mixed into the bulk regolith.
Okay.
And it's an easier environment to operate in, to sort of collect the bulk regolith in a more sort of industrial way and not be operating in these PSRs. But it is a bit of an open question exactly what form that water ice takes, whether
Okay.
it's granular, whether it's bound into the existing regolith grains, whether it's captured in glasses. So there's a lot of great science being done on that right now. I think actually the Chinese Space Agency just came out with a paper in the past week or two talking about these glasses that encapsulate some water ice. So that is a really exciting emergent field that we're following very closely, obviously.
Yeah. So fun. Great. Well, we'd love to switch a little bit gears into a more technical topic. We've definitely touched on some technical things, but curious to get your thoughts and insights on the future of our industry. We're attending conferences from time to time, and a big one that keeps coming up, a big question that's really fun to explore is once Starship is online, or maybe some of these other big rockets, what is going to be the next thing to emerge? Like, what is the next domain? What is going to be, how is the industry going to change? And really curious to hear your thoughts. There's a handful of ideas or theories out there of kind of what's going to take over and dominate the industry. But where are you placing your bets?
Sure. I would say I'd placed a pretty big bet on the in-space transportation
Sure,
already.
sure.
And lunar development. So, and that's something Argo is working on, but something personally I and my co-founders believe really is the next stage of the space economy, and Starship is going to have a big impact.
Yeah.
I mean, Starship fundamentally is way more mass to orbit, right?
Mhm.
That's the premise for less money, which means you get more stuff into orbit, and the important thing is that stuff creates business opportunities, that you
Yeah.
use that as useful payload, as science instruments, as habitation, whatever it is. So getting to orbit is step one, and step two needs to be either getting it to its final destination or using it in orbit.
Yep.
And creating that industry and that sort of economic network in space is going to require a lot of transportation,
Yeah.
which requires a lot of propellant. Starship can do some of that, right? They're already
Right.
talking about in-space refueling. They can bring up propellant as payload. But dealing with Earth's gravity, well, you would still rather be bringing up useful cargo rather
Yeah.
than
Sure.
propellant to bring the cargo around. So we're really excited about in-space resource utilization or in-situ resource utilization. Whether that's from the moon as we're doing it, I know a lot of people are thinking about asteroids.
Mhm.
SpaceX itself and others are talking about doing it on the surface of Mars for
Yeah.
that sort of ecosystem, right? So I think that Starship is going to enable a whole new ecosystem of these in-space businesses that will need a transportation infrastructure layer on
Yeah.
which to operate. There's a lot of really exciting ones also enabled just by Starship's volume alone.
Oh, yeah.
Right, you look at the habitation companies, whether it's Gravitics or it's Vast or it's Axiom, that are talking about building space stations that can sort of be launched in one shot in a Starship volume. Or companies like Think Orbital that are creating larger volumes in space out of smaller components. So that's a really exciting play, is sort of the real estate in space.
Yeah.
And then there's other companies that are talking about making gigantic satellite buses sort of
Mm.
for cheap that you can build platforms on top of. So there's a lot of directions you can go
Yeah.
when mass becomes cheap to orbit. But we really believe that in order for that to blossom as a true sort of networked economy, that the permanent sort of in-space transport layer needs to exist to be moving goods and cargo and people around between all of these centers of activity that'll be generated.
Yeah. Very, very cool. So we had Scott Macklin from Gravitics on the
Oh,
show
great.
a bit earlier. So that was a big topic that we discussed, and Starship definitely came up. But part of a lot of what we focused our conversation on was, okay, we want to get humans off Earth. Where should we go? Where should we start? What should be our roadmap to colonization of space? And so that was a really fun conversation. It's cool to see other companies popping up taking on stuff like that. And so, yeah, it sounds like that's one of your bigger bets. Because don't get me wrong, like space transportation, very, very critical. It's it seems in a lot of ways more of an infrastructure as well, though, like an extension of Starship. And like you're still going to be moving payloads as like your primary business, right? So what are some of these other areas that you expect to your customers to be? Like, what are these payloads that you're going to be moving so much in the 5-10 years down the line? It sounds like the habitations may be a big one. And
Sure. Yeah. So the way we're thinking about it, especially early on, is that we're providing this orbit changing service, right? We're providing Delta V as a service.
Mhm.
So we can get you from low Earth orbit to anywhere else you need to go in cislunar space, whether that's an actual satellite or say it's just inert cargo or raw material for something. And by using the lunar water as the propellant to do that, we generate economic value on the surface of the moon,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
don't need NASA or the DoD necessarily to be pouring a lot of funding into that and make it an attractive investment target if there's economic value there, right?
Yeah.
If the water and the regolith itself has use for other industries, then we believe the moon itself will become an economic hub because we'll be extracting a lot of useful energy from it.
yeah,
And that, we make an analogy to the gold rush all the time, right? That railroads enabled towns to grow, and those enable
Right.
services, and that grows by itself because you're getting value out of the point B of that transportation network. So we're really excited about that, about the moon becoming a useful target for expansion and colonization. Not just for the sake of expanding and colonizing, but because it's useful,
yeah.
because there's economic value there on the surface for the taking. So we're really excited about that. Further out, just other things to move around, as you asked.
Don't mean to minimize it,
No.
but just
No,
try
no.
to simplify it, you know?
No, it's important. It's important because it's not just satellites, right? Like there's also a large push for in-space manufacturing. There's a lot
Yes.
of processes that can only happen or happen much better in a zero gravity environment.
Yeah.
And those processes all need raw materials.
Yeah.
And they also need to deliver their finished products. So both of those, getting raw materials and delivering finished products, take delta V, right?
Yeah.
You need propellant to do both ends of that service. So that's a big one, right? Just getting raw material to and from nodes of manufacturing or economic activity in space requires propellant. So that's always going to be a demand, and hopefully that space keeps growing too.
Yeah. And you mentioned analogous to the gold rush. There's certainly a finite amount of water on the moon. Is that anything that we could use up in any foreseeable, like reasonable amount of time, or is it pretty dang abundant?
It appears to be pretty dang abundant, and that's one of the things that we're really excited about, is that number keeps going up. I think the latest numbers.
Oh, they're creating water on
They're certainly finding it. Yeah. I won't go too far into how it gets created. But the latest estimates from the Chinese Space Agency, from the rover they just sent up, is something like 200 trillion kilograms of water.
How does that compare to Great Lakes or something?
That is a great question. I
Okay.
have no idea.
Or
Yeah.
anything that I can wrap my mind around?
But we're talking about using a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of that water, even in a
Yeah.
polar region,
Wow.
for the whole infrastructure that we're talking about. And one thing I do like to think about relative to that sort of resource scarcity is that by using an in-space resource, we are alleviating a burden on Earth resources.
Right.
So, getting Delta V
Wow.
sourced in space is a huge multiplier that removes much more Delta V from needing to be launched from Earth.
Yeah.
So you're really trading at a high leverage by using a resource from a shallower gravity well.
Wow.
Yeah. So cool. So then let's see here. So in the coming years, we're going to hit like 70,000 satellites in orbit. We have all these mega constellations coming online and planned. So Starship will open up volume. You mentioned companies developing larger satellites or larger like buses for satellites and the like. Is that a better way for us to move forward to kind of reduce the number of satellites and increase the size and volume? And how is Argo planning to address the wide range of sizes that there's going to be in orbit in the coming decade or so?
Right. So great question. Our initial vehicle, the Argonaut, we're targeting sort of the small sat class, a couple hundred kilograms.
Okay.
Say. But we are really excited about the future. Starship and other launchers, large launchers, providing for multi-ton class payloads. So we definitely intend future offerings to have much more capability. The small sat market is where we're starting for a lot of reasons, and there seems to be a lot of demand there to access higher energy orbits for sure. And you mentioned something about the quantity of satellites.
Yeah.
We know that space debris and sort of deorbiting and in-space servicing is a big topic of conversation.
Very
right
hot
now.
topic.
Absolutely. And, there's a lot of complexity there, but it seems pretty obvious to us that a reusable vehicle that lives in space is the right way to tackle that problem, right? They can be up there, they can go accomplish a mission, deorbit a satellite, say, go get another one, deorbit that satellite, be refueled. So you're not sort of using up a one-shot vehicle every time to do so, or a one-shot add-on to your satellite or something like that. But really interested to see how that space evolves.
Yeah, and if you're starting with a smaller vehicle in the Argonaut, it sounds like you're not counting on Starship in any way for your business model, right? I'm sure does it help your unit economics but do you not require it?
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great way to frame it. We are not counting on Starship. I'm excited about Starship for personally and professionally.
Yeah.
But it's important to us that the service stand on its own economically as sort of a closed loop, right? And there's a lot of great non-commercial ways to pursue funding and to pursue missions right now between the DoD and NASA. But we want this ecosystem, this water propellant ecosystem sourced from the moon, to be able to stand on its own two legs, on its own economic merits. Starship lowers like you said, the unit economics and the entry point of getting the mass to the orbit. And a lot of that is getting the mass, to the moon. A lot of that cost is getting it into low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
So that helps us greatly.
Yeah, it probably helps you both on getting your own equipment into space, but then also your customers getting into space, and then
Absolutely.
that just kind of reopens the industry even more. So we're at a funny time right now. We're about a few days away, in theory, from a Starship launch. In fact, this episode might air after a launch attempt, but though I don't know, the FAA hasn't actually granted a license. So I thought I'd put you on the spot and see what you think is going to happen in the first Starship orbital attempt.
Sure. I think, as Elon said, it's going to be excitement guaranteed.
Yep. Usually are, yeah.
I have a lot of faith in the people working on the Starship program. Having spent a lot of time on it myself, it's fantastic engineers. The facilities are great. The energy is there, and yeah, I would say I'm optimistic in at least a mostly successful first flight.
Okay.
I think it's going to be tremendous, and they've done a lot of testing.
Yeah.
So.
Elon's, I think, put it publicly at he's throwing out a 50% chance on the first one and then 80% by the end of the year. So it sounds like you're maybe even a little more bullish than that.
I think I would take the over on 50%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Brian kicking the same put the spot on you.
I mean, I think this is the most engines that have ever lifted a vehicle off the ground successfully. Like Russia was pretty terrible at trying to make that happen back in the 60s. It's a really hard problem. I think Falcon Heavy did a good job of helping to have SpaceX learn how to do that well. And so I'm pretty optimistic in the ascent portion, and then we'll be very curious to see what happens on orbit and re-entry. So I think I agree. I think I'm slightly bullish too, but I think even just clearing the pad is going to be interesting, and I really hope, for the sake of your previous team and all of your hard work, that you at least clear the pad and don't have massive damage to it. That's like almost the worst. That's like
That is
the worst outcome.
It is. Having lived through that at 40, I would not wish that on anyone.
Right. And then you don't even learn that much either in theory. Like you don't get to validate that many systems if you only like let go and then something bad happens. So let's hope that we at least see better results than that. Last question I have is, you said that you're not depending on unit economics for Starship, but I'm curious to hear your thought on if other space startups out there, like, is it time to start planning businesses and business models based purely on Starship? Like, if it doesn't work without Starship, but it does work with Starship, like, is now the time that we can start building those companies, or do we really need to wait to make sure it succeeds first?
I think it's a pretty classic risk reward calculus, right? I think building a company that is wholly dependent on any launch provider is tough, whether that's Starship or someone else.
Sure.
I think, Starship, I have every confidence will work eventually. So, putting your money on the table now and starting to build a business, you might time it perfectly and reap great rewards if you're
Right.
ready and you're first at the table
Yep.
versus waiting until it's more of a sure thing. So I certainly think that now is a time that makes sense to start building those businesses if you have a relatively high risk tolerance. And a lot of people do. I mean, that's sort of the whole venture capital ethos, right?
Yeah. Though now's maybe not the best time in venture capital, but
Yeah.
yeah.
It's going to be really fun to look back, kind of kicking it back to what you two were talking about, and like what will you move around is to look back in 5 years, right? And you go, it's similar to the railroad. Yeah, we've built this infrastructure. Look at how many new possibilities that we couldn't even dream up 5 years ago have come into play because of it. So it's really fun to have this conversation now and then look back in the future and see what's popped up.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some good conversations going on, like at Harvard and MIT, and I'm sure elsewhere, where there's these people in the space industry, interested in the space industry, that are trying to do their best to pull in Fortune 500 companies and any company and say, if you're not thinking about what you can do in space, like, you're already behind. And it might seem like there's nothing you can do, but like, sit down, think, talk to people in the space industry and see what you can come up with. Because if there's not something now, there might be once Starship is online. And I think it's really exciting to see what existing companies are going to do, what existing businesses can find value from this industry.
Yeah. One more question on kind of the more personal side. It's personal and professional.
Sure.
Is working with your brothers. So are you three pretty close? Do you have pretty strong working relationships already? Do you imagine, you're going to take it to that roof with ocean views and scrap around a little when things get tough? Yeah. What's that like?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We work really well together, and we're, I would say, great friends. And we've been doing engineering projects together our whole lives. Like I mentioned earlier, from building model rockets to we did a high altitude balloon project together to send something up to the edge of space. So this is really a natural extension of that, I think, in a lot of ways.
What do your parents think?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they love it. I think they're a little confused. Neither of them are engineers at all, but they're incredibly supportive, and they're excited for what we're doing.
I can see them now on talk shows in the future, like sharing their perspective of your journey.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. It's interesting to have family life. I mean, we know, right? Husband and wife as business partners too, having your personal family life connected to business. And I think for some people it can be really, really challenging, and you can hear those stories a lot. And for other people, you find your harmony really well and are able to have a synergy that's hard to achieve with people outside of those relationships. So really cool to see that, and it's really fun to witness how this company will grow.
Yeah, no, it's a blast.
Yeah, I think at least for us, speaking about our personal and professional lives and integration, it was this like nice shortcut to be like, okay, we already know each other's strengths and weaknesses and how we fit together well. And I think that helped us avoid a lot of friction or
Yeah.
issues at the beginning. Like we already knew how to operate well together, and I imagine you're feeling some of those same benefits from like the start of Argo as well.
Yeah, a way I've explained it before is that it's critical in any team environment, but especially a small, fast-paced sort of startup team environment, to have high communication bandwidth.
Yeah.
Yes.
And with family members or great friends or people you've worked with before, but that's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like I can convey something in many fewer words and a shorter time duration to either of my brothers than I can almost anyone else on the planet.
Yep.
So that's great to have that sort of high bandwidth communication built in.
Yeah. When there's the trust and the relationship built, you can take a bit more communication risk because you know that the people that you're communicating with know your background, they know where you're coming from, and there's the base of trust there, so you can get to the heart of things quickly.
Absolutely.
So cool. Very good. Well, before we wrap this whole thing up, anything that we missed that you would like to share?
Oh man. Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I'm incredibly excited about both Argo and about the future of the space economy. I really do think what you said earlier about, if you're not thinking about what you can do in space, you should be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I really do think we're just right at the edge of a transformational moment in this industry and the ways that it's going to impact the broader economy as a whole. And I think this is really a critical step in getting there. It's sort of the next obvious stepping stone. So we're really excited to be along for the journey and hopefully helping.
Ah,
Yeah. So
So cool.
fun and exciting. Yeah, I liken it a bit to when the internet was just getting started. Like there was very
Yeah.
little on the internet. There were a few business models that made obvious sense right from the beginning, and then now just our world doesn't operate without it. And if you're not using the internet in some way, you're behind the game. And I think we're gonna think similarly, I think, in a decade or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, yeah, before we wrap this completely, we record at a place called the Podcast Place, and we have an incredible man who's doing the recording and producing for us. His name's Solomon. We like to do a little segment called Solomon Says. Solomon, any questions, thoughts, insights
Sort of
that
like
you
Simon
got from?
Says. Huh?
Yeah.
Well, you were talking earlier that you like Star Wars. I'm a Star Trek person myself, and so when I listen to you guys talk about this, I always try to bring it down to grassroots. Sort of sift through the large objective talk and get down to the technology. So, if you were having to describe what you do to a 5-year-old or someone who's what would you say? Would you say, yeah, we're like a space taxi? How would you describe what you're planning on doing?
Absolutely. I think an easy analogy for people to get their heads around is that, a big container ship comes over from overseas. It comes into the port of Los Angeles. And right now in space, the containers need to include their own transportation, their own driving systems, their own everything. They get off the truck. They have to drive themselves to their destination. And then most of that gets thrown away. What we want to build is the truck that's sitting at the container port that gets a cargo loaded on the back. It goes to the final destination. Then it comes back to the port and picks up another load, goes back, right? So we're separating out the container ship from the last mile transportation and delivery system. And that doesn't work with single-use trucks, right? You have to have the trucks be reusable. And this is something that, Elon obviously has talked a lot about with reusable rockets, but sort of every leg in a transportation system has to be reusable or the end product falls off a cost cliff immediately or up a cost cliff immediately.
Yep.
Sure.
So I think that's an analogy I would make to a 5-year-old. It's we're building those trucks in
Yeah.
space.
And instead of the shipping container bringing gas from its origin port, it's using Los Angeles
Right.
gas.
There's a gas station somewhere.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
container doesn't also need to show up with a full tank of gas, and then it gets to your house, and the gas tank's empty, and now you have
Yeah.
this truck to get rid of.
Yep.
All right, 2 more teeny questions. Sure. So one of the things that you mentioned was and what I gather from when we have these conversations is that there are a lot of emerging technologies that are trying to create these same goals of being able to build in space, inhabit in space, and leverage space and create that economy. And the technologies range from like LEO, building in space, all of these things. Do you feel like we're at a point right now where you just have a lot of different technologies that sort of do the same thing, sort of overlap a little bit, where everybody's sort of competing to become that number one? Or do you feel like we're sort of past that and we're starting to see some stabilizing technologies that everybody else will build on?
I think a little bit of both, certainly. There is a lot of jockeying to figure out which company fits where exactly. A lot of people are broad scoped. They're sort of trying to do everything in space. Some people are really focused on one thing that they want to be great at. But I think it's much more sort of collaborative and synergistic than it is competitive right now.
Yeah.
There's a lot of these companies, the ones that are building things in space, the ones that are making space stations, transport companies, those need each other to survive. And the more of them there are, the more of them will succeed. So I think sort of densifying that network and taking advantage of the network effects that come along with more companies trying to do more things in space is a rising tide that's going to lift all ships.
Awesome. Okay, last question. You talked about the amount of water on the moon, okay, which is really cool. By the way, I didn't know there was water on the moon. So learn something new every day. But you also talked about how it was the Chinese space agency that found these things, and you guys are sort of collaborating. Do you feel at some point there will be some kind of economic system on the moon where different countries take ownership of certain things, and that becomes now this whole, thing of you have to now purchase this water, this belongs to this guy? Are you concerned about that from your perspective, or is it sort of like, well, we're just going to do the engineering and you guys figure the rest of that out?
What a great question.
What a
That
great
is
question.
a
Wow.
great question.
Should we record a whole nother episode on space policy?
Yeah, I'll be
Yeah.
back tomorrow.
Right?
That is an incredibly interesting field. It's a fast evolving and fast emerging field of space law, space policy.
Space policy and law is moving quickly.
The thought around it is
Okay.
So we're encouraged by the fact that the United States, anyways, seems very heavily invested in enabling the commercial use of in-space resources. So both of the last two administrations, or the current and the last administration, gave policy directives encouraging commercial use of in-space resources, which is great. Countries, that are signatories to the Outer Space Treaty cannot lay claim to the resources or the territory, but it seems like the trend is towards commercial entities being able to use them. We'll see how that evolves as it goes forward, but I think that it's going to be a really fun time, and the incentives are aligning to lead to commercialization being helpful for everyone.
So cool. So cool.
Thanks a lot.
What a great question.
Yeah, what a great question. Wow. See, this is why. Gotta be solid on set. Wonderful. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. This has been incredibly insightful, really practical and fun information. We're so excited to see what you build.
I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to be building it. And thank you guys so much for having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Thanks, listeners, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on AdAstra Win.